person icon as people join in. Yeah, there, like it says, 0 right now. More people will join in, but that's just on YouTube. So we should be live, everyone. If people are already here in the chat, say hello. I'll say hello in there as well. And I see some people already join in. And we're going to wait just a minute before we really get going into our conversation here, just to give people an opportunity to join in. Mark, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Sage. I know you got back from vacation. Where'd you end up going?
I was in Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam, and then I went to Busan and Seoul in South Korea, which was really fun.
Oh, nice. Yeah, we're about to go to South Korea. Probably
awesome.
Near end of September or October.
I love it. This is my second time going. If you've never been before, I don't know if you've gone already before. I was gonna say,
no,
always happy to give recs.
Okay, yeah, I'll hit you up for that.
And if anyone watching has any recommendations of where Mark should go in South Korea, feel free to hit him up as well. All right, we'll go ahead and kind of get started here with introductions. Again, if you're watching, say hello in the chat. And if you have questions, feel free to put in there too. And if we have time, we can hopefully try to get to them. So welcome, everyone. My name is Sage Elliott. I'm the host for today's Fireside Chat, Union Fireside Chat. At Union, we build tools around ML orchestration and making data and AI pipelines more robust and hopefully easier for you to build. You might know us from our open source Flight and Pandera. You can check out them. I think there's links to at least Flight in the description, but also you can check out everything we're doing at Union.ai. There's a lot of exciting stuff going on there. But today isn't about us. We have Mark from Gradient with us. Welcome, Mark. And our Fireside Chat today is going to be focused around improving agentic workflows with longer LLM context. Before we get into that, though, Mark, could you provide a brief introduction and maybe let us know a little bit about your background and a little bit about what you're currently working on? I always think it's interesting to see how people kind of got into the role or industry that you're currently in.
Yeah, I can absolutely do that. So I'm one of the co-founders of Gradient. I serve as the chief architect overseeing the research and development work at our company. At Gradient, we're in the business of enterprise AI automation, and we do that by leveraging agents for handling specific out-of-domain scenarios that could occur in workflow automation. How did I get here? I mean, it's been sort of an interesting journey, and with that, I would tell everybody that you can make anything you want out of your career. It's a long journey, and as long as you're learning and growing, that's the thing that counts. So I previously was a machine learning scientist at Splunk, working on streaming analytics and deep learning for search. And then prior to that, I was a data scientist working cross-functionally between go-to-market and product analytics teams at Box. And I actually spent half of my career as a quantitative trader at systematic hedge funds over on the East Coast. And, everything that I sort of done since the beginning of my career has been about leveraging data and large scales of it to deliver value through, automation or actual trading signals. So you just go towards your passions, and that led me over to here. I wouldn't have thought I'd be starting my own AI company back when I started, but I think that so long as you're having fun and you really want to learn more, that's all that counts.
Yeah, that's every time I switch, it's because I want to learn more and I see an opportunity for that. Real quick though, I know so many people I always talk to are interested in learning AI for trading and getting into that field, and it's definitely something I've thought about before. How did you think about that kind of side of your career? Was it interesting, or would you recommend people checking out? Obviously, if they're passionate about it, they probably should. Any other things you want to add to that, maybe?
Yeah, I think it's probably one of the most interesting use cases for AI. In terms of what the problems that you're attacking, it's a little bit different from what we really think about in the tech industry. Because in the tech industry, when we think about automation and a lot of times trying to leverage AI, you want to go after the highest signal to noise ratio data sets, whereas in finance, the public markets are actually incredibly low signal to noise ratio. So you have a lot of noise, and that's the main problem that you're trying to approach. And a lot of that goes with respect to the fact that the signals are time varying. So that's another aspect where you can't really just leverage very static data. It has to be a very dynamic process. For people that really want to go into that career, though, I'd say it was one of the most fulfilling times in my life too, as well. I think uh, it's one of the few areas where you get instant feedback because a lot of times, right, you build a product, you ship it, there's an entire process for that. And incorporating feedback and improving your product is in itself like follows quite a long life cycle. Whereas on the markets and trading, your feedback is instantaneous. You basically did something great, or you really, had something that wasn't that great. And the what's similar though, I think, and for those that those of you who are tennis fans and listening to, Roger Federer had a recent a speech at Dartmouth where it's basically saying you just need to be 55% better or right every single time to actually make a lot of progress. And I think that's the same actually within AI too as well. Those accumulated gains and working hard on that will actually progress you a lot.
Awesome. That was awesome to hear more about that. And I like that idea of the instant feedback. You're right. Probably one of the fields with the fastest feedback ever. And actually like seeing how much you're making an impact, with your models, etc. Awesome. So thank you again for sharing more about that. Our main topic today is improving agentic workflows with longer LLM context, something I know you've been talking a lot about, and building tools to help with that at Gradient, which, by the way, links to Gradient and everything are in the description as well. We can also check out Gradient.ai is your domain, correct?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Check that out. But before we get into the kind of improving the whole workflows with longer context, maybe we could talk about what longer context is first. Like, what is longer context for large language models?
Yeah, it's actually quite simple. So long context just means you can pass more tokens, which are the smallest unit of measurement for models. And with long context, I think, well, it's sort of a moving number these days, obviously, because they've become sort of table stakes. But I would say, to me, a long context model should be greater than 200,000 tokens. And a lot of the top frontier models these days allow for 1 million tokens.
Yeah, that's quite a difference than at least what I remember the max being like a year ago or something like that.
Yeah, 1024 was the number a year ago. So we've come a long way.
And how does a longer context kind of affect large language models behavior in general?
Well, I think the main aspect is you actually want to retain the initial behavior and the initial quality of the model for the tasks that actually don't require long context, but extending the context out actually opens up a lot more use cases. And I think you can think about that more so as human beings to an extent. If you had a great memory and you have perfect recall, which transformers, again, what's unique about them is that they, unlike any other, even the state space models, they can just perfectly recall and repeat exactly what the information was when it was in their pre-training. So if you're a human being and you can just recall everything that's happened over 5 days, use it and leverage it, that's an incredibly powerful capability that comes out of being able to extend your memory and effectively your working memory, which is what in models is long context.
And if most people listening have probably used something like Chat GPT before, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but part of like the context there could be your chat history over time kind of keeps getting stored as a longer and longer string or a formatted kind of string that stays in the model, and that's kind of part of the longer context. If you had really short context, then it might not be able to kind of look at that over time.
Yeah, that's correct. And in that case, the most people think about that as multi-turn interactions. So on the chat side of things, it's about conversation history, and on the agent and the workflow side of things, we tend to think about it a little bit differently because a lot of the pattern of execution is asynchronous. So having that is more of action states that have occurred in the past and being able to just keep appending, an append only to style memory to keep passing into the model.
Awesome. Well, before we dive deeper onto that specific part, what is an agentic workflow and how does it differ than maybe other LLM workflows people might already be familiar with? Most of those are probably like chats and things similar to that.
Yeah, so when I define agentic workflows, what I really think about is non-deterministic execution paths. So from the start of your workflow, if you think about, hey, the typical directed acyclic graph that's in flight, or even in Airflow, or any of the typical orchestration frameworks, you know how that execution is going to occur. Whereas with agents, it's about giving the model decision making capabilities at every single node. So then you would imagine if the model is deciding whether or not the workflow is finished or it needs to be redirected to a different path, that is a very autonomous a very autonomous framework that you're operating in. So agents have that incredible quality and can behave as if they're just trying to interact with the environment that way.
Awesome. And going back into now tying in the longer context, can you share an example or use case where you've kind of seen increasing the longer context improve agentic workflows? Or if you want to touch a little bit on what you were just talking about, kind of how is a longer context thought of when it comes to agentic workflows versus like the chat example we were talking about earlier?
Yeah, it can be used in two styles. So the main pitfalls of agents today typically incur in two forms, where it's one, the agent isn't given enough context to understand the decision boundary of like what it needs to, um, how it's supposed to execute its task. So the most simplistic case is classification. So if you during classification and you only give the agent only a few shots, model sample selection has a high impact on the sensitivity of quality. The second pitfall that usually occurs is just poor instruction following capabilities, right? Like when you're using the chatbot, sometimes you want it to do something and then it doesn't really follow what you want it to do because you're too vague or it's not understanding what you want to do. And then if you ever really looked into when agents try to generate plans, um, executing the plan is sometimes kind of difficult because the tasks aren't broken down granularly enough and they're too the tasks themselves are too complicated. So having long context, how do you circumvent that? You just add way more and articulate out the tasks much more clearly. So then you expand upon those and you can leverage that in that capacity. So those are like the two core primitives on that. And the way that that actually gets implemented or the use cases that actually arise due to that are things where, in the workflow, if you're doing search, oftentimes we have a search node within our workflow where the agent has to go out and grab information, and we can stuff much more information into the context of the agent, or correspondingly allow for more refinement over time of the agent's actions, and it'll be aware of that context and that history of memory that's been occurring.
Do you have an example of an agentic workflow that you kind of like to use to illustrate like some of the possibilities?
I'd say coding tends to be the one that best illustrates control flow. although it is definitely the most complicated and sensitive currently. And if you think about the multi-agent coding standpoint, you actually transform a lot of the synthesis step, which is having multiple agents go out and uh, have their information gathering step. When you want to pass it back into the planning agent, you actually have to, summarize a lot of information, right? Like it needs to fit in the context length. And that is lossy. So if you actually operate on an append only architecture where you're just appending all the history and giving it raw to the planning agent, you actually see in a lot of instances that you get a lot better performance because you don't really have any lossiness. And summarization, right, is neither here nor there sometimes, where it doesn't tell you quite enough, but it kind of gives you a summary of something, but you can't debug it. On the other side of things, if you want something a little bit more concrete, what we usually have in these type of workflows, since we're in the automation business, if you're thinking about a lot of the data transformation processes, so you're taking a lot of unstructured data on the left side, and then you're trying to process that simplest way, filling out forms, you can use the long context models to leverage the in-context learning ability for the agent so that it's able to actually complete the task. So you're passing in a lot more documents, you're making it learn on the fly, and you're actually making it more um, flexible to understand certain positional elements of like data schemas.
Awesome. And someone asked a good question here. I'm going to reword it, I think, a little bit, but they asked, like, is there any public data set on what a useful contact length is? And I think maybe I'll reword this to be, at least in the past, I've read some research papers where, adding longer context to, let's say again, just like a chat system isn't always providing better results necessarily. Is that kind of similar with agentic workflows, or is there like a best practice to start with a certain context length, or is it just all about experimentation right now and finding what works best for your use case?
I definitely think we're so early in the process with respect to truly understanding the boundaries of long context and in figuring out like we're with respect to even retrieval augmented generation, which was maybe the synthesis of why we wanted to double down more on long context models, is the fact that like we're not even in agreement on like what's the best chunking mechanism for sending context into a model, right? Like that's already a controversial enough topic. And I think the premise of all of it is that as a company, we're betting on the technology. Like if enough people are working on the problems to improve the technology, I think that there's going to be a simplification in the architecture of the grounding mechanism for the model. So like anything you send into the model, right, as examples or any of that, that's like grounding the model to understand either what is the context or the world that it needs to operate in. And we definitely think that the models will get better at reasoning. The acquisition of longer context will get better. So whatever you think is the limit now is actually going to change. Probably within 3 months to the next state of the art mechanism. As for like what I actually think, when you like, there's a good heuristic for any of this stuff. Uh, if it's a simple task that you don't need, sometimes even zero shot would be okay. That's not really a great use case for long context. Whereas if you need to retrieve a lot of information and link it together, um, using positional elements that you actually beforehand can't really know where they are, like long context models might thrive in that scenario, specifically because evaluations such as Ruler already show that they're really good at variable tracking and keeping track of all the state of things.
Awesome. That sounds about right. And like you said, everything's changing all the time. There could be a new state of the art tomorrow. That feels like there almost is, like every day or every week.
Mhm.
It's exciting, and it's cool to keep experimenting and seeing what works best for all these different use cases. So what advice would you give to someone who's starting out kind of building agentic workflows maybe for the first time in their applications?
I'd say start out simple and figure out where the holes are in the gaps. So the easiest agent that you could ever think of is LLM in the middle, and then just having a for loop and passing it back to the same language model, and then checking if the work is done and allowing for the model the autonomy to decide when to stop the loop. Um, that type of control flow will already show you a decent amount in terms of where you need to start branching out your architecture. And then you could probably work in towards, filling out the gaps in terms of like the planning aspect of things. So there are a lot of patterns out there that try to attack the pitfalls of planning a lot more, like tree of thoughts or chain of thought used to be the state of the art, but a lot of models already elicit that emerging capability now. Like they've either been trained into that, or have been incorporating that aspect into the pre-training data. I think that'll kind of change over time, but being able to construct those kind of architectures and playing around with those, I think, and instrumenting the observability for that will be kind of pivotal to the learning experience. Because I think a lot of people do approach it where they just try hacking away at things and they're not even keeping track of what's happening. They just want to see the model succeed. Um, but you have to keep in mind that the fact that these models, there's no determinism and there's a little bit of randomness, like that's a feature, not a bug. So being able to leverage that, the best capability, will require experimentation.
I loved that you mentioned observability too. That was something I worked in like the last 2 years at a previous company. And I would always ask people, people are constantly changing their prompts, et cetera, to cause changes in behavior. And I would often ask people, but how are you tracking that? And a lot of the times, at least then, and it was all super new, so it's probably changed in the last 2 years, but at least then a lot of people are like, I feel like it's better. Like, you test some prompts and stuff. But yeah, especially if you're in production and you want to you're changing prompts or changing context size, et cetera. And if you can come up with metrics that are interesting to measure, it's a really good way of again, kind of getting a quick feedback loop to your model,
Mhm.
right? And you can even deploy multiple versions and see which one works best. All right, so we've talked a lot about agentic workflows, longer context. Before we go into any other questions around that, can you tell us more about Gradient and what are you doing over there?
Yeah. So we work on automating back office and middle office processes, particularly for financial services companies and healthcare companies right now. Um, Having to do that, you'll learn a lot about how you can build production grade workflows. And in our observation through all of that is leveraging the technology, and then in a way like adopting and changing our focus on certain aspects of research and development. So fine tuning used to be pretty important for a lot of these models back in the day, whereas like with longer context lengths, the meta learning aspect has gotten so good that we sort of question the need to fine tune a lot of times. And um, what we are focused on is delivering the final solution to customers. So uh, since we work with the business stakeholders or the functional business stakeholders of companies, they don't really care, honestly, like how the AI is working. They just want to know that it's hitting their standards of quality, and it's actually flexible enough to onboard new use cases eventually. So that strikes at the heart of what we're really trying to accomplish, which is full automation of almost anything that you could think of within these enterprises.
Awesome. And it definitely leverages your financial trading background. It kind of sounds like potentially there.
Yeah, to an extent here and there. Obviously, I'm not trying to create the the algorithms themselves to trade on,
Right,
but
right.
the support functions that keep everything going are very core to the heart of like what a business actually is.
Someone had a great question in the chat actually here is, are there any performance or cost reasons to reduce context links? So I think probably kind of when you're thinking about maybe, I don't know, quantizing a model in some way.
I think reducing the context length, there's always sort of a cost to that, or sorry, increasing context length, there's always a cost to that, right? If you get charged per token, there's a cost to that. If you are running your own compute, it's the time, right? You're charged per hour or per second effectively. The main thing that we balance between the two though is like flexibility and quality. So if in fact your workload or the set of data that you're being passed into your workflow is always going to effectively be the same, you can think of fine tuning as trading the prompt into the model for automation purposes at least. With respect to the new innovations though, context caching is something that we leverage ourselves at Gradient. So if let's say you have you have document or context that's always being passed into the model for a particular workflow, that's 200,000 context length, you're only going to be hit on the first query for that, and then from there on, because it's cached, you can leverage and use the rest of it, and you actually aren't being hit by a huge cost concern. So like I personally feel like we should bet more in the direction of the technology getting better for this, because I've never found an instance where making the pattern or the system more complex has garnered more interest in development to improve the entire user experience. Usually simplification is what everybody invests all the R&D into so that the user can just feel a seamless experience.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I have one last question for you, really, before we probably wrap up. We're close to our kind of half-hour time. What are you looking forward to most in the AI field right now? What's something that's exciting that you're kind of waiting for, or you see kind of happening right now, and you're excited to see it progress?
So this is kind of a philosophical combined with a technological wave or trend that I'm particularly interested in. So at a high level, what we are betting on and what Gradient's vision is to have the experience where you feel okay with having an agent perform a task and just going off away for like a day or two, and then coming back and having the task completely completed. And it's like a task that is human level and possibly one of the more expensive tasks that a human would be doing, right? And I don't know when that's going to happen, but as the models are getting stronger, we will eventually get there. And seeing how the interface and the user interface with AI is going to change then is something that I am just really excited to see, because it's clear to me, at least, chatbot interface is not the convergence of the eventual interface we'll use. And even some of the stuff that could be like more automation related is not quite the interface that will exist. But when that arises and we figure out a way to have the model continually learn, work as a companion to us, and figure out how to best leverage it as human computer interaction, like that is what I'm super excited to eventually see.
All right, you heard that, UI designers. You better start thinking about this right now. Yeah, that will be really interesting, and I mean, I think a lot of people are very excited for an agent that can do something like that for all sorts of different tasks, right? Like, I love the idea of telling it to do something and coming back in days or weeks, like you said, and like in the UI, like you mentioned, how does that work? There's probably going to have to be a kind of like some sort of continuous reporting or feedback type of thing potentially too. Like, you don't want to say 2 weeks and then it's gone and done the wrong thing. I mean, hopefully AI at that point, I guess, is smart enough not to do that. But just like with people, right? Like if you're working with engineers, especially a more junior engineer, you definitely kind of want to see progress of what they're doing and help, steer the ship. And that would be interesting to see in a UI of like kind of like, you started, but I kind of need to steer it now.
Yeah, and yeah, to an analog would be like, what is the Jira for multi agents in the future, right?
Yeah.
In a way, I don't know what that looks like, but you can already kind of conceive it. You can look at the patterns that we've used ourselves to kind of leverage that, and you know, project tracking in a way for agents is not too dissimilar.
Yeah, I never thought about it in that way. Jira for agents, which
Yeah.
someone said, I don't know when they said this, someone said already on it. I don't know if that's a UI developer or what in the chat, but would love to see what you're working on. All right, before we wrap up, thank you so much for making the time to come on here. Is there anything else you want to shout out besides going to gradient.ai? I know you probably have some community, some great resources, maybe upcoming events, anything you want to shout out?
Yeah, I think we continue to invest in contribute back to long context evaluations. So we are open to any sort of collaboration on that side of things. And for those that are in SF or around the Bay Area, don't be a stranger. Reach out, chat agents with me, chat long context. I'm always really interested in hearing about use cases that other people are trying to onboard.
Awesome. Yeah. And the links to your socials are in the description as well. So even if people are watching this recording later, go check out the description and go connect with Mark. And I assume they can also ping you in chat there to also talk about agents and exciting things that you're working on.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure.
Awesome. With that, thank you again, Mark, for coming on, and thank you everyone for attending, and some great questions that were asked in the chat as well. If you have any questions later, again, you could comment on the video or connect with me or Mark and ask those questions in chat on LinkedIn or Twitter. With that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the stream. So again, thanks for coming on, everyone. And it should be ending.